Bob Fringely, and I'm here to tell you the incredible story of how personal computers took over the world. Why am I telling you this at a basketball game? Well, I like the game, but mainly it's because of that guy down there. His name is Paul Allen, and everything you see here belongs to him. The Portland Trail Blazers basketball team, their arena, even the dancers. Thanks to personal computers, he has $8 billion to spend on such toys. 20 years ago, Allen and his high school friend Bill Gates were running a two-man software company called Microsoft. Today, Allen is richer than God, and Gates is richer than Allen. 20 years ago, young men like Paul Allen and Bill Gates invented the personal computer, and in doing so launched a revolution that's changed the way we live, work, and communicate. It's hard to believe that 20 years ago there were no personal computers. Now it's the third largest industry in the world, somewhere between energy production and illegal drugs. But the most amazing thing of all is that it happened by accident, because a bunch of disenfranchised nerds wanted to impress their friends. This is my garage, and this is all my junk. I'm probably one of the few guys in Silicon Valley who actually has room in his garage for a car. Most everyone else seems to use theirs to start computer companies and create great fortunes. But I don't have a fortune. I'm a failure. I've written computer programs that almost ran, and I've designed and built hardware devices that frankly didn't work at all. But I'm the ideal guy to tell the story of the personal computer business because I'm its premier gossip columnist. And everyone tells me all their secrets.
Hello.
And this is my home, where I write a gossip column for a computing magazine. Sorry about the mess. Institutions in constant change like the PC industry are driven by rumor and gossip, and I thrive on both. My electronic mail address is deluged with inside information about everything from product flaws to who's sleeping with whom. What ties these gossipers together is a desire for truth. These people and their love of technology have fueled the PC revolution. To understand them is to understand that revolution. So let's go find some. Meet Edwin Chin on a Saturday morning at the Weird Stuff warehouse. This could be 1976 or 1996, because there is always a new generation of techies like Edwin who hear the calling. Most other kids are watching TV, but not Edwin.
You know, I'm interested in electronics and technologies and a hobby since I started when I was like 6 or 7, you know.
How old are you now, Edwin?
10 right now.
It's no coincidence that the only woman in the vicinity looks bored. Because this is a boy thing, the obsession of a particular type of boy who would rather struggle with an electronic box than with a world of unpredictable people. We call them engineers, programmers, hackers, and techies, but mainly, we call them nerds.
I think a nerd is a person who uses the telephone to talk to other people about telephones. And a computer nerd, therefore, is somebody who uses a computer in order to use a computer.
And people have like different degrees of passion, different types of passion. You know, some people they just live databases, and like fifth normal form is just like nirvana, and like they just quest for it, you know. Like that's like what gets them up in the morning.
What do your friends think of you?
Boy, he's a nerd. Yeah. But I don't mind. I'm used to being called a nerd. Can't have other people stop your dreams.
You've got a very wide wire.
And in Silicon Valley, the dream is to grow up to become a boy like this.
It doesn't make any difference at all to you whether it's on one of this machine.
Graham Spencer is chief programmer for Architects Software. 6 guys who graduated from Stanford University and started a company just because they like each other. This is a modern-day startup, but at heart, it's no different from PC pioneers like Apple or Microsoft, nerds who share a dream. Their hobby is their business, and the culture they've created is identical to that of 1,000 other technology companies. First, they dumped the idea of 9 to 5. In this industry, you can work any 80 hours per week you like.
And then I've got my cap, which I use to cover my eyes and
Oh, yes.
sleep in the early morning while everybody's coming in.
We didn't even obey a 24-hour clock. We'd come in and program for a couple days straight. We'd, 4 or 5 of us, when it was time to eat, we'd all get in our cars and kind of race over to the restaurant and sit and talk about what we were doing. Sometimes I'd get excited talking about things I'd forget to eat, but then we'd just go back and program some more. It was us and our friends.
Oh, we have Coke and cold pizza.
I drink about 2 liters of Coke a day.
2 liters of Coke a day.
Yeah.
And do you think of it like as brain food?
That keeps me going. That and, listen to heavy metal and get caffeinated and hack.
I'd sit down in my room on the floor with sheets of paper spread all around with my computer design I was working on, and always I noticed that I was up pretty late at night and I had lots of Cokes, just part of that life.
Combination of stale pizza and body odor and sort of spilt cola kind of ground into the rug.
I'd brought some spaghetti to work and then forgot to wash out the container for the last couple of days, maybe 6 or 7 if I had to be honest. Oh, that smells bad.
Eating, bathing, having a girlfriend, having an active social life is incidental. It gets in the way of code time. Writing code is the primary force that drives our lives. So anything that interrupts that is wasteful.
What is it about the internal logic of a computer that's so enticing? For one thing, such logic can be understood, as opposed to things that can't be understood at all, like the motivations of young women, say, or of the French. Let me explain. Time for the Cringely Crash Course in Basic Computers, Part 1. This is a mainframe computer. All of these cabinets are one machine. In the old days, all computers were this size. They were tended by engineers in white coats, a kind of priesthood who took their jobs very seriously. Now, all computers work pretty much the same, whether it's a giant that serves 2,000 users like this one, or a little notebook that serves only me. They process numerical data, adding, multiplying, comparing. Fact is, if you can quantify it, a computer can handle it. It's the emotional stuff they don't know what to do with. The data must be put into a special binary code consisting only of ones and zeros. And you have to give the computer instructions, also in code, to tell it exactly what to do with the data and in what order. These instructions are called a program. In the early days, you put in the instructions by flipping switches or loaded them from paper tape. This was called machine language. It made computers a pain to use. Even worse, every type of computer spoke a different machine language.
While the ENIAC could compute the 30-second trajectory of a shell in 20 seconds, operators required 2 days to program it to do so.
Then a U.S. Navy captain named Grace Hopper solved the problem. She invented a computer language, English words that the computer itself could translate into binary code. Now users could type whole lists of instructions into a computer rather than flipping those damn switches. Like most things having to do with computers, that first language had a silly name, COBOL. It was followed by other languages like Fortran and BASIC, and they all made computing just a bit more user-friendly. So when some nerd tells you he's been up all night programming or writing software or hacking code, what he really means is he's been typing long lists of instructions into his computer. Mainframe computers were far from personal. They sat in big air-conditioned rooms at insurance companies, phone companies, and the bank, and their main function was to get us confused with some other guy named Cringely, who was a deadbeat and had a criminal record. Eventually, computer terminals did begin to appear in some schools, but most of us paid no attention. But there was usually one kid who did pay attention, falling in love with the digital purity of those ones and zeros. He was the nerd.
And I took this book home that described the PDP-8 computer, and it was just like a Bible to me. I mean, all these things that for some reason I'd fallen in love with, like you might fall in love with a card game called Magic, or you might fall in love with doing crossword puzzles or something else, or playing a musical instrument. I fell in love with these little descriptions of computers on their inside, and it was a little mathematics. I could work out some problems on paper and solve it and see how it's done, and I could come up with my own solutions and feel good inside.
So you would keyboard these commands in, and then you would wait for a while, and then the thing would go and it would tell you something out. But even with that, it was still remarkable, especially for a 10-year-old, that you could write a program in BASIC, let's say, or Fortran, and actually this machine would sort of take your idea and it would sort of execute your idea and give you back some results. And if they were the results that you predicted, your program really worked. It was an incredibly thrilling experience.
Nerds wanted their own computers right from the beginning, but it took a technological breakthrough to make that possible. This is it, the chip, the microprocessor. This is what allows you to have a mainframe computer on your desk. In the 1950s, mainframes were as big as this garage, and that's because they were filled with thousands of these vacuum tubes or valves. Eventually, the valves were made much smaller and replaced with transistors. Still too big, however, to make a computer that could fit on your desk. What that took was further miniaturization. Here we have a single piece of silicon etched with thousands of transistors. This microprocessor holds more than 1 million transistors, and that's the secret of the personal computer. And that's why they call it Silicon Valley, not Computer Valley. These are the people who invented the microprocessor, Intel. Intel was started 28 years ago by a handful of guys after a row with their old boss. Their microprocessors today power 85% of the world's computers.
RTS table?
Intel not only invented the chip, they are responsible for the laid-back Silicon Valley working style. Everyone was on a first-name basis. There were no reserved parking places, no offices, only cubicles. It's still true today. Here's the chairman's cubicle. Knock, knock. Yeah, I've knocked on the door, but there's no door. Gordon Moore is one of the Intel founders, worth $3 billion. With money like that, I'd have a door.
In a business like this, the people with the power are the ones that have the understanding of what's going on, not necessarily the ones on top. It's very important that those people that have the knowledge are the ones that make the decisions. So we set up something where everyone who had the knowledge had an equal say in what was going on.
Intel's microprocessors kept getting more powerful. They soon had enough horsepower to run a whole computer. Only Intel didn't appreciate the brilliance of their own product, seeing it as useful mainly for calculators or traffic lights. Intel had all the elements necessary to invent the PC business, but they just didn't get it. Lucky for us, someone did. This is the chip that launched the personal computer revolution. This is the magazine that announced it. In January 1975, featured on the cover was the world's first personal computer, the Altair 8800. It was the crazy idea of an ex-Air Force officer from Georgia, Ed Roberts.
If you look at it, it was kind of a grandiose, almost megalomaniac kind of scheme, And right now I couldn't do it because I could see right off there's no way you could do this. There isn't any way you could do this. But at that time, we just lacked the benefits of age and experience. We didn't know we couldn't do it.
20 years after Ed Roberts' flash of brilliance, this exhibit is being held to celebrate the anniversary of the Altair. Like every other PC pioneer, Ed built his computer just because he wanted one to play with.
There were some of us that lusted after computers, really, at that time. All the computers in the world tended to be in big centers, and you had to get permission to get close to them, and it was, nobody had access to computers then. And the idea that you could have your own computer and do whatever you wanted to with it whenever you wanted to was fantastic.
And where was all this happening? It was far from Silicon Valley, Intel, or IBM. Out in the desert near the airport in Albuquerque, New Mexico, Ed Roberts ran a calculator company called MITS. Having an ugly building wasn't its only problem. MITS was going bankrupt. Nobody was buying calculators, and Ed needed $65,000 just to stay afloat.
And we went to the bank and had a late night meeting, and the issue was whether we closed MITS down or they loaned us an additional $65,000. And I was asked how many machines that I think we would sell in the next year after it was introduced. And I said 800, and was considered a wild-eyed optimist at that. Within a month after it was introduced, we were getting 250 orders a day. Started about 6.
The Altair wasn't even a computer. It was a computer kit.
Whoa, this is a pretty well-equipped machine.
You had to build it yourself, and even then it usually didn't work. Still, the demand was amazing.
And there were actually people that came to MITS, a couple people with camper trailers, and camped out in the parking lot waiting for their machine. I mean, they were so eager.
I mean, I think everybody had sort of daydreamed, or Walter Mitty, about owning a computer. The surprise was that it would be possible for the average college student, for example, who was living on bare subsistence, to actually buy a computer.
This is what really amazed me, was that people were so, there was a sort of a pent-up demand for having your own computer.
And if it could be that cheap, what a wonderful thing.
This is an Altair computer, the first personal computer. And not just any Altair. This is Altair serial number 2, the second one made. The first Altair made was sent off to be photographed at a magazine and was lost in the mail. So this is the oldest personal computer in the world. Pretty historic junk, but the question is, what do you do with it? I mean, it has a front panel with switches that you can click back and forth and some lights, but in the back, there's no place to connect a keyboard, there's no place to connect a monitor, there's no place to connect a printer. In fact, there's practically nothing at all that you can really do with this thing. But back then, 1975, the people who had it were thrilled. The nerds formed clubs to talk about their new toy. One of the first was the Homebrew Computer Club, which met on Wednesday evenings in a hall rented from Stanford University in Silicon Valley. Presiding over Near Anarchy was Lee Felsenstein, who pretended to be in charge.
I would start the meeting by making a horrendous loud noise because everyone was talking and I had to get some attention somehow. And I would use it to call on the person in question. I'd make threatening gestures with it. Most of us were in the electronics industry to a certain extent. There was also a stratum of physicians. And there were a lot of radio amateurs, for instance, finding a new technology that wasn't stale. But most of us were at a sort of middle level downwards. We saw ourselves as crazed, ignored geniuses, or possibly geniuses, but at least we could each hope to get our hands on a computer of our own.
Not much in them.
The very uselessness of the Altair is what drove the hobbyists together. Roger Mellon and Harry Garland started an early computer company. They came here to meet others and to figure out just what the heck could be done with this new toy. A solution in search of a problem.
There's no keyboard that I can see.
The Altair was tedious to use. At first, the only way that data and instructions could be given to the computer was by flipping switches. Take something trivial like 2 + 2. Each 2 needed 8 different switches to be flipped, then a 9th switch was used to load them all. Add required another 9 switches. The answer 4 was if the 3rd light from the left turned on. Eureka!
So if you had a program that was 100 bytes long, you had to go through this procedure 100 times to load that into memory.
It took a long time. I bet it did. And what happened if you lost power or you lost your way in the middle?
You cried.
The Altair may have been frustrating, but it drove the nerds to experiment, finding real uses for the useless box, turning it from a curiosity to a computer.
Steve Dompier set up an Altair, laboriously keyed a program into it. Somebody knocked the plug out of the wall, and he had to do that all over again, but nobody knew what this was about. After all, was it just going to sit and flash its lights? No.
You put a little transistor radio next to the Altair, and he would, by manipulating the length of loops in the software, could play tunes.
The radio began playing The Fool on the Hill. Da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da, in the tinny little tunes that you could tell were coming from the noise that the computer was generated, being picked up by the radio. Everybody rose and applauded. I proposed that he receive the Stripped Phillips Screw Award for finding a use for something previously thought useless. But I think everyone was too busy applauding to even hear me.
It was a very exciting thing. It was probably the first thing the Altair actually did.
Turning the Altair into a useful tool required a programming language so users could type their programs in rather than flipping switches. What it needed was a version of some big computer language like BASIC, only modified for the PC. This was called a BASIC interpreter, but it didn't yet exist because the experts all thought that not even BASIC was basic enough to fit inside the tiny Altair memory. Yet again, the experts were wrong. Here comes the guy who solved the problem. 20 years after finishing the first microcomputer BASIC, Paul Allen is returning to Albuquerque for a celebration of that event, this time with his $15 million jet and 3-foot red carpet. At a time when I was killing brain cells, this guy was founding an empire. He has come to eat rubber chicken in honor of the Altair's 20th anniversary.
I'd like to introduce to you Paul Allen.
Allen co-founded Microsoft with his younger buddy from high school, Bill Gates.
One day in Boston, I was in Harvard Square, and I covered Popular Electronics with this thing that looked like what I'd been imagining. And so I grabbed it off the shelf, and I looked at it, and I bought it, and I ran back to Bill's dorm, and I think he was probably playing poker that night and usually losing money at that point. One of the few times when that's been the case.
Paul showed that to me. Then, okay, here was a company that would be needing software.
And he said, okay, well, we got to call these guys up and see if this thing is for real.
We realized that things were starting to happen, and just because we'd had a vision for a long time of where this chip could go, what it could mean, that didn't mean the industry was going to wait for us while I stayed and finished my degree at Harvard.
So called up Ed, we told him we've got this BASIC, and it's just, for your machine, it's not that far from being done, and we'd like to come out and show it to you.
So we'd created this BASIC interpreter. Paul took the paper tape and flew out. In fact, the night before, he got some sleep while I double-checked everything to make sure that we had it all right.
But I had no idea what it was really going to be like to try to run the software. It had never been run on an actual computer before.
He was very nervous about whether this would actually work. And he got to the office, and we all gathered around, and he put his fingers on the switches, and he loaded BASIC in with paper tape into the Altair.
I was so nervous. It's not going to work. It worked.
And it came up. And it could do a few little simple things.
And it was amazing when Paul called me up and said the thing had worked the first time. And of course, it was incredibly fast.
And it printed out memory size. And I think Bill said, well, it printed something. And so I said, yeah.
Oh, that was unbelievable. The fact that it really worked was a breakthrough.
Maybe there wouldn't be a Microsoft if the screen hadn't come alive. Who knows? It might all be quite different.
After the demo succeeded, Bill forgot about finishing university. Afraid of missing his chance to dominate the new industry, he joined Allen in what was then the center of world microcomputing research, among the sleazy bars and gas stations of Albuquerque, New Mexico.
And they lived across the street from Mitts in the Sundowner Motel. And the prostitutes and the drug dealers are out on the corner. And they were writing BASIC for the Altair computer. And gradually they actually started Microsoft here in Albuquerque. So
we hired some of our high school friends basically to come down and stay with us in our apartment, which became very crowded.
Well, we were pretty young. We started when I was 19, and so we just had a lot lot of energy.
They worked really hard. They listened to really loud music. I could hardly stand to go in the software room sometimes because the music would be banging off the walls, mostly acid rock.
You know, we usually go out, eat pizzas, and then go out and watch action movies.
They would work all night long, and there were days when Bill Gates would be sleeping on the floor in the software lab, and
sometimes would be Bill and these two other guys all, you know, sitting on tables around the apartment with stacks and stacks of paper, writing, converting to BASIC for the 8080.
I still know the source code by heart, and that was a work of love. You know, we just kept tuning and tuning that thing, and so that kind of craftsmanship paid off.
BASIC let the Altair be used for both fun stuff and real work. People attached terminals to the computer and began writing games, word processors, and accounting programs. Most of us didn't notice, but soon there was a thriving industry for enthusiasts. By the end of 1975, dozens of other companies were building microcomputers.
We created an industry, and I think that goes completely unnoticed. I mean, there was nothing. Every aspect of the industry, when you talk about software, hardware, application stuff, dealerships, you name it, was all done at MITS.
It was a wild time. It was a very exciting time. And the first user convention, where we got people to come in and tell us what they were doing, what they were excited about. And other companies like Processor Technology or IMSI or Comemco got going as add-on companies. These companies are long forgotten, but they were the humble beginnings of the PC industry.
Left in the hands of those early hobbyists, the PC might have never made it to the shopping mall. Reaching the wider market required a different type of vision. Enter the flower children of California, who thought the PC was, well, groovy.
From the safety of secret committees, they talk about the danger of war.
Remember that the 60s happened in the early 70s, right? So we have to remember that. And that's sort of when I came of age. So I saw a lot of this. And to me, the spark of that was that there was something beyond sort of what you see every day.
Far from the smell of the gun.
It's the same thing that causes people to want to be poets instead of bankers. And I think that's a wonderful thing. And I think that that same spirit can be put into products. And those products can be manufactured and given to people, and they can sense that spirit.
To help you understand all this, I will now take off my clothes.
Well, why? He says, well, frame relay is scalable.
Jim Warren knows better than most what the hippie movement did for the PC. A 60s radical himself, he staged the West Coast Computer Fair, for a time the biggest computer show in the world. The fair was where the PC really arrived. It's also where Jim got rich.
So, Jim, is this where you hold all your meetings?
As many as possible. Sure, why not?
This is how Silicon Valley entrepreneurs conduct business?
I don't know whether it's how entrepreneurs conduct.
Believe it or not, Jim once taught mathematics at a Catholic girls' school.
Bubbles, Bob?
Sure.
Okay.
Jim was immediately fascinated by the PC, like many Bay Area hippies. The California counterculture was crucial to the PC's development.
And the whole spirit there was working together, was sharing. You shared your dope, you shared your bed, you shared your life, you shared your hopes. And a whole bunch of us had the same community spirit, and that permeated the whole Homebrew Computer Club. As soon as somebody would solve a problem, they'd come running down to the Homebrew Computer Club's next meeting, say, hey everybody, you know that problem that all of us have been trying to figure out how to solve? Here's the solution. Isn't this wonderful? Aren't I a great guy? And it's my contention that that is a major component of why Silicon Valley was able to develop the technology as rapidly as it did, because we were all sharing. Everybody won.
Out of this creative show and tell came Apple Computer, the first mass-market PC company. The Apple founders, a couple of recent graduates from Homestead High, were regulars at homebrew meetings. Steve Wozniak was the technical wizard. and Steve Jobs was the visionary who saw microcomputers as a possible business. The first Apple computer was primitive. It was cobbled together by Woz to impress his friends at the homebrew meetings.
Everybody was interested in computers, so I started getting a crowd around me, because even though I was too shy to raise my hand and say anything in a club meeting, after the club meetings, I would put my computer that I had built, and every week it had a little bit more working on it too. But I would set it down and let people type on the keyboard. I would explain what's in it. If they come up to me and ask a question, I can answer. You know, nowadays I would have the ability to tell them what it is, you know, and be a little bit more promotional, but back then I could only answer questions if they asked me. But I got a group that started gathering around me. And Steve Jobs saw that I had a lot of interest around me at the club, and he said, let's start selling it. And let's make this company. Came up with the name Apple, and that's how it started.
Apple was at best a funky company, started by a couple of teenage hackers who previously had been working as Alice in Wonderland characters in a local shopping mall. And they started it in this garage right here. The first Apple computer was built here. Now there are more than 10 million in use around the world. And I was there. Well, for a short time, I was an employee at Apple Computer, employee number 12, and one day I helped move materials out of this garage. At the time, Steve Jobs said the company was short of loot, so he offered to pay me in company shares, but I held out for the money. My mother still reminds me of that incident. The Apple I was even less of a computer than the Altair. A single circuit board that came with neither a case nor a keyboard. Still, Steve Jobs managed to sell 50 Apple I's. That experience showed Jobs that there was a market for a real computer, the Apple II.
It was very clear to me that while there were a bunch of hardware hobbyists that could assemble their own computers, or at least take our board and add the transformers for the power supply and the case and the keyboard and go get a, you know, et cetera, go get the rest of the stuff. For every one of those, there were 1,000 people that couldn't do that but wanted to mess around with programming. Software hobbyists. Just like I had been when I was, 10, discovering that computer. And so my dream for the Apple II was to sell the first real packaged computer.
Steve Jobs' dream was impossible. It needed too many chips, making the product too complicated and expensive to build. But Woz didn't know it was impossible.
And then I got into a way of why have memory for your TV screen and memory for your computer, make them one. And that shrunk the chips down, and I shrunk the chips here, and why not take all these timing circuits? I looked through manuals and found a chip that did it in 1 chip instead of 5 and reduced that. And one thing after another happened. I wound up with so few chips. When I was done, I said, hey, a computer that you can program to generate colored patterns on a screen, or data, or words, or play games, or anything. And it was just the computer I wanted, for myself pretty much. And but it had turned out so good. He said, I think we have a computer we could sell 1,000 a month of. How could you sell 1,000 a month,
But we needed some money for tooling the case and things like that. We needed a few $100,000.
That was a lot of money for two people who had nothing in their lives to speak of, didn't have a $400 bank account.
So I went looking for some venture capital.
The scruffy 19-year-old seduced the conservative world of venture capitalists. The man Jobs persuaded to part with his cash was Arthur Rock, the inventor of venture capital and the man who had originally funded Intel. At least the Intel boys had graduated from university and owned suits.
Well, he wore sandals, and he had very long hair and beard and mustache, but very articulate. He was, I think he, at one time in his life, and it was probably when I first met him, that he ate nothing but fruit.
So as a mainline venture capitalist,
This is not the norm. This is not the norm.
With money in hand and under occasional adult supervision from an ex-Intel manager named Mike Markkula, Woz and Jobs finished the Apple II and ordered a local factory to build 1,000 machines. 2 years passed between the Altair and the Apple II, and in that time, a lot of things changed. We went from a computer that was designed for hobbyists and engineers and certainly looked like a piece of test equipment to a computer that looked like a piece of consumer electronics. And we can thank Steve Jobs for that. His sense of design demanded that this structural foam case be used for the Apple II, the first case of its type on a personal computer. And not that there wasn't good engineering inside either. The Apple II was a model of efficient engineering. Here's the floppy disk drive controller, for example. There are 8 chips here where previously there would have been 35. This is an amazing bit of engineering that we can attribute to Steve Wozniak, who was certainly the Mozart of digital design. And all told, it turned the Apple II into a sensation. The Apple II was launched at Jim Warren's West Coast Computer Fair, one of the first big microcomputer shows. The 1978 show drew thousands of attendees and dozens of exhibitors, many of them members of the Homebrew Computer Club, which spawned most of the early microcomputer companies. But there was only one company showing something that looked like a modern personal computer. Right by the entrance, in a prime spot negotiated by Steve Jobs, sat the Apple II. It mesmerized all who saw it.
My recollection is we stole the show. And a lot of dealers and distributors started lining up, and we were off and running.
How old were you?
21.
21?
Yeah.
Fire up the Chevy and drive out to the beach.
Following the West Coast Computer Fair, the next 2 years were ones of explosive growth for Apple, with thousands of customers arriving on the doorstep of the tiny office in Cupertino, California. Sales and profits grew so quickly that Apple had more money than the company could spend. And the company was very young. The founders were in their 20s, and some employees were even younger, like 14-year-old Chris Espinosa, who never left. He still works at Apple almost 20 years later.
There would be public demonstrations of our product every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon at 3 o'clock. And that was good because it was after school. So I would get out of my, sophomore, junior year of high school. I would ride my little moped down to the Apple offices, and at 3 o'clock I'd give the demonstrations of the Apple II.
When we were in the office, it was, hey, jokes and wiring up people's phones to do weird things, just every one of us. I mean, there wasn't a person in Apple, I don't think, for a couple of years that was, super serious. We were lucky. We had, like, the hot product of its day.
And some of the people that I did original demos to came up to me years later and said, I founded a $100 million chain of computer stores based on the demo you showed me one Tuesday afternoon at Apple. It's really fun.
It went so successful that all of a sudden, Steve and I wouldn't have to worry about work for the rest of our lives. And then it got even more successful and more successful after that. And it was sort of a shock.
The Apple II set a new standard for personal computers and showed there was some real money to be made. Rival companies popped up all over, but the market was still hobbyists. Guys with big beards who thought a good use for their computer was controlling a model train set.
Loads in the actual program.
But for microcomputers to be taken seriously, they had to start doing things that needed doing. Functions that were useful, not just for fun.
Over 2,000 programs with
The enthusiast market had its limits. To reach the rest of us, the Apple II needed what nerds call a killer application. Software that's so useful that people will buy computers just to run it. For the Apple II, this application was called VisiCalc. It came straight from the blackboards of the Harvard Business School. Invented by a graduate student, Dan Bricklin, with his programmer friend Bob Frankston, VisiCalc was the first electronic spreadsheet. A spreadsheet is a tool for financial planning, bringing together for the first time the seduction of money with the power of microcomputing. Dan Bricklin's professor at Harvard showed how companies used a grid of numbers on a blackboard to work out profits and expenses.
60 down here, and your profit would be this minus this, which gives you 40. And then, well, let's see, what's the sales growth? We'll say there's a 10%.
The trick to a spreadsheet is that all the values in the table are related to the others. So changes in one year would ripple through the table, affecting prices and profits in subsequent years. Students were asked to calculate how future profits would be affected by various business scenarios. It was called running the numbers, and they did it laboriously, by hand.
Well, let's say your initial costs have 100 fixed cost at the beginning, so now you have a minus 20 is how much you make the first year. And then the second year you have 100, but your variable, let's say, is 25. So now you're losing, what is it? There's a pain in the neck. I wasn't very good at this stuff. 80, what? No.
We failed. We just lost
minus 15, right? And then eventually you're making money. What year do we make money? And, you know, and how much does the cost of money? That's what running the numbers was. And
because each value was linked to the others, one mistake could mean disaster.
It blows all your numbers afterwards because you make all your calculations based on other numbers before them. If I had miscalculated...
Dan, who had worked as a programmer, started daydreaming about how he could use a computer to replace the tedious hand calculations.
I imagined that there was this magic blackboard that did like word processing does word wrapping. If you make a change to a word, it automatically pulls everything back. Well, why not recalculate the same way? So that if I changed my number, you know, I should have used 10% instead of 12%. I could just put it in and it would recalculate everything, go through it. You know, and that would be this idea of electronic spreadsheet.
Following a model that's common today, Dan Bricklin designed the program, but got his friend Bob Frankston to write the actual computer code. After months of programming late at night, when computer time was cheaper, the Harvard Business School Blackboard came to life.
Now we've set this up, okay? Then we type a new value in, okay? Here I'm going to take that 100, and I'm going to change it, right? And here, it recalculated. Whoa! That saved me so much time.
People who saw it and went and got it, but like an accountant, I remember showing it to one around here, and he started shaking and said, "That's what I do all week. I could do it in an hour. What I could do, you know," and they would take their credit cards and shove them in your face. I meet these people now, they come up to me and say, "I got to tell you, you know, it's
you changed my life.
Changed my life. You made accounting fun." And
you have to remember what it was like in those days. We did not use the word spreadsheet because nobody knew what a spreadsheet was. I came up with the name Visible Calculator, or VisiCalc, because we wanted to emphasize that aspect.
VisiCalc hit the market in October 1979, selling for $100. Marv Goldschmidt sold the first copies from his computer store in Bedford, Massachusetts. After a slow start, VisiCalc took off.
What it did in our society, it gave people who were obsessed with numbers, whether they're in business or at home, how much am I worth today? What's my stock portfolio worth? How am I doing against budget on this project? It gave them the ability to play with scenarios and change it and say, well, what if I do this? So put people, in a sense, in control of the thing that lots of people in our society feel is driving them, and that's numbers.
The spreadsheet was every businessman's crystal ball. It answered all those what-if questions. What if I fire the engineering department? What if I invest $10 million in pantyhose futures? Look, I'll be rich in under a year and have slimmer thighs at the same time. The computer says so.
$5 up 25!
The effect of the spreadsheet was enormous. Armed with an Apple II running VisiCalc, a 24-year-old MBA with 2 pieces of dubious data could convince his corporate managers to allow him to loot the corporate pension fund and do a leverage buyout. Right. It was the perfect tool for the 80s, the Meade decade, when money was everything and greed was good.
The money seemed limitless.
Investments, cash flow.
The whiz kids, many fresh out of college, drawn here by the lure of big money.
Estimates.
He'd made millions for himself and others selling junk bonds.
Forecasts or plans.
A group that has been motivated by greed.
Calc can help you work faster.
In 5 years, the PC had gone from a hobbyist's toy to an engine that shaped the times we lived in. Thanks to VisiCalc, the Apple II made history.
Everybody you talked to just seemed excited about talking about what we were doing. And there was this huge media explosion, kind of like the internet is receiving today, of this is the happening thing. You read about it over and over and over, and every time you took an airplane flight, you read about it. And every newspaper, every week, you'd read something about small computers coming, and Apple was one of the highlight companies. So we were being portrayed as a leader of a revolution. And we really felt that we were a leader of a revolution. We were going to change life a lot.
Pretty good for a company started in a garage 3 years before. But not all the PC pioneers made great fortunes. Dan Bricklin decided not to patent his spreadsheet idea. Though more than 100 million spreadsheets have been sold since 1979, Bricklin and Frankston haven't earned VisiCalc royalties in years.
You know, looking back at how successful a lot of other people have been, it's kind of sad that we weren't as successful.
It would be very nice to be gazillionaires, But it can also understand that part of the reason was that that's not what we're trying to be.
We're kids of the 60s. And what did you want to do? You wanted to make the world better. And you wanted to make your mark on the world and improve things. And we did it. So by the mark of what we would measure ourselves by, we're very successful.
Yes.
And what about Ed Roberts? 3 years and 40,000 computers after assembling that first Altair, the fun was over for Ed. MITS was just another player in what had become a competitive market for personal computers. Roberts sold his company in 1978 and started a new life. He went back to his native Georgia and retrained as a doctor.
I hadn't really thought anything at all about it until the last few years when people started taking credit for things that we did at MITS. And that's the only thing I think about it. It irritates me, the things that we did at MITS and we took all the heat for, that other people have tried to take credit for. And that frustrates me.
While Ed Roberts invented the personal computer, it was the founders of Apple who got rich. When Apple went public in spectacular fashion in 1980, Jobs and Woz became multi-millionaires. The nerds had inherited the earth.
I was worth about over $1 million when I was 23, and over $10 million when I was 24, and over $100 million when I was 25. And it wasn't that important because I never did it for the money.
It was just a little hobby company like a lot of people do, not thinking anything of it. I mean, it wasn't like we both thought it was going to go a long ways. It was like, we'll both do it for fun. But back then, there was a short window in time where one person who could sit down and do some neat, good designs could turn them into a huge thing like the Apple II.
It's astonishing that at the beginning of 1975, nobody owned a personal computer. All there was a mock-up on a magazine cover. Yet within 5 years, there had emerged here in Silicon Valley a billion-dollar industry. An unhealthy fascination with technology on the part of a few adolescents had awakened the nerd within us all. PC companies were sprouting like mushrooms to meet the enormous demand. Apple had emerged as the top fungus and had taken 50% of the market. To the boys in Cupertino, every day seemed like Christmas. But Scrooge was around the corner. There was a company that everyone associated with the word computer, a company that expected, no, demanded to dominate its market, IBM. Big Blue was on the move, and Silicon Valley would soon be feeling the reverberations. The story so far. In 1975, Ed Roberts invented the Altair personal computer. It was a pain to use until 19-year-old pre-billionaire Bill Gates wrote the first personal computer language. Still, the public didn't care. Then two young hackers, Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, built the Apple computer to impress their friends. We were all impressed, and Apple was a stunning success. By 1980, the PC market was worth $1 billion. Now, view on.
We are nerds.
Most of the people in the industry were young because the guys who had any real experience were too smart to get involved in all these crazy little machines.
It really wasn't that we were going to build billion-dollar businesses. We were having a good time.
I thought this was the most fun you could possibly have with your clothes on.
When the personal computer was invented more than 20 years ago, it was just that, an invention. It wasn't a business. These were hobbyists who built these machines and wrote this software to have fun. But that has really changed. And now this is a business. This is a big business.
Power Center!
It just goes to show you that people can be bought. If you're really an exciting audience.
Thank you. I want to see a Blue Laurel Motors. If you got that.
How the personal computer industry grew from 0 to 100 million units is an amazing story. And it wasn't just those early funky companies of nerds and hackers like Apple that made it happen. Most of this transformation from hobby to big business can be linked to 3 letters: IBM. IBM was and is an American business phenomenon. Over 60 years, Tom Watson and his son, Tom Jr., built what their workers called Big Blue into the top computer company in the world. But IBM made mainframe computers for large companies, not personal computers, at least not yet. For the PC to be taken seriously by big business, the nerds of Silicon Valley had to meet the suits of corporate America. IBM never fired anyone, requiring only undying loyalty to the company and a strict dress code. IBM hired conservative hard workers straight from school. Few IBMers were at the Summer of Love. Their turn-ons were giant mainframes and corporate responsibility. They worked 9 to 5 and on Saturdays washed the car. This is Intergalactic HQ for IBM, the largest computer company in the world. But in many ways, IBM is really more a country than it is a company. It has hundreds of thousands of citizens, it has a bureaucracy, it has an entire culture. Everything, in fact, but an army. Okay, Sam, we're ready to visit IBM country. Obviously, we're dressed for the part. Now, when you were in sales training in 1959 for IBM, did you sing company songs?
Absolutely.
Well, just to get us in the mood, let's sing one right here.
You're kidding.
I have the IBM, the songs of the IBM, and we're going to try for number 74, Our IBM Salesman, sung to the tune of Jingle Bells.
IBM, happy men, smiling all the way. Oh, what fun it is to sell our products night and day. IBM, Watson men, partners of TJ. In his service to mankind, that's why we are so gay.
Now, gay didn't mean what it means today then. Remember that.
Right.
Okay?
Okay, let's go.
Okay. I guess it was okay.
Perfect.
Yeah. When I started at IBM, there was a dress code. That was an informal oral code of white shirts. You couldn't wear anything but a white shirt, generally with a starch collar. I remember attending my first class, and a gentleman said to me as we were entering the building, "Are you an IBMer?" And I said, "Yes." He had a 3-piece suit on, vests were of the Vogue, and he said, "Could you just lift your pants leg, please?" I said, "What?" And before I knew it, he had lifted my pants leg, and he said, "You're not wearing any garters." I said, "What?" He said, "Your socks, they're not pulled tight to the top. You need garters." And sure enough, I had to go get garters.
IBM is like Switzerland, conservative, a little dull, yet prosperous. It has committees to verify each decision. The safety net is so big that it's hard to make a bad decision, or any decision at all.
At which we announced a new organizational structure.
Rich Seidner, computer programmer and wannabe Paul Simon, spent 25 years marching in step at IBM. He feels better now.
I mean, it's like getting 400,000 people to agree what they want to have for lunch.
You know, I mean, it's just not going to. It's going to be lowest common, and it's going to be hot dogs and beans. So, so what are you going to do? So IBM had created this process, and it absolutely made sure that quality would be preserved throughout the process, that you actually were doing what you set out to do and what you thought the customer wanted. At one point, somebody kind of looked at the process to see, well, what's it doing and what's the overhead built into it. And what they found is that it would take at least 9 months to ship an empty box.
By the late 70s, even IBM had begun to notice the explosive growth of personal computer companies like Apple.
The Apple II, small, inexpensive, simple to use. The first computer...
What's more, it was a computer business they didn't control. In 1980, IBM decided they wanted a piece of this action.
There were suddenly tens of thousands of people buying machines of that class, and they loved them, and they were very happy with them, and they were showing up in the engineering departments of our clients as machines that were brought in because you can't do the job on your mainframe kind of thing.
JB wanted to know why I'm doing better than all the other managers. It's no secret. I have an Apple. Sure, there's a big computer 3 flights down, but it won't test my options, do my charts, or edit my reports like my Apple.
People who'd gotten it were religious fanatics about them. So the concern was we were losing the hearts and minds. And give me a machine to win back the hearts and minds.
In business, as in comedy, timing is everything, and time looked like it might be running out for an IBM PC. I'm visiting the IBMer who took up the challenge. In August 1979, as IBM's top management met to discuss their PC crisis, Bill Lowe ran a small lab in Boca Raton, Florida.
Hello,
Hey, Bill,
Boy,
nice
good
to see you again. Yeah, I tried to match the IBM dress code. How did I do?
That's terrific. That's terrific. I'm sorry.
He knew the company was in a quandary. Wait another year, and the PC industry would be too big even for IBM to take on. Chairman Frank Carey turned to the department heads and said, "Help!"
He kind of said, well, what should we do? And I said, well, we think we know what we would like to do if we were going to proceed with our own product. And he said, no. He said, at IBM it would take 4 years and 300 people to do anything. I mean, it's just a fact of life. And I said, no, sir, we can provide you a product in a year. And he abruptly ended the meeting. He said, you're on, Lowe. Come back in 2 weeks and tell me what you need.
An IBM product in a year? Ridiculous. Down in the basement, Bill still has the plan. To save time, instead of building a computer from scratch, they would buy components off the shelf and assemble them. What in IBM speak was called open architecture. IBM never did this. 2 weeks later, Bill proposed his heresy to the chairman.
And frankly, this is it. Now, the key decisions were to go with an open architecture. Non-IBM technology, non-IBM software, non-IBM sales, and non-IBM service. And we probably spent a full half of the presentation carrying the corporate management committee into this concept, because this was a new concept for IBM at that point in time.
Was it a hard sell?
Mr. Carey bought it, and as a result of him buying it, we got through it.
With the backing of the chairman, Bill and his team then set out to break all the IBM rules and go for a record.
We'll put it in the IBM section.
Once IBM had decided to do a personal computer, and to do it in a year, they couldn't really design anything. They just had to slap it together. So that's what we'll do. You have a central processing unit, and let's see. You need a monitor or display and a keyboard. Okay, a PC, except it's not. There's something missing. Time for the Cringely Crash Course in Elementary Computing. A PC is a box full of electronic switches, a piece of hardware. It's useless until you tell it what to do. It requires a program of instructions. That's software. Every PC requires at least 2 essential bits of software in order to work at all. First, it requires a computer language. That's what you type in to give instructions to the computer, to tell it what to do. Remember, it was a computer language called BASIC that Paul Allen and Bill Gates adapted to the Altair, the first PC. The other bit of software that's required is called an operating system. That's the internal traffic cop that tells the computer itself how the keyboard is connected to the screen or how to store files on a floppy disk instead of just losing them when you turn off the PC at the end of the day. Operating systems tend to have boring, unfriendly names like Unix and CP/M and MS-DOS, but though they may be boring, it's an operating system that made Bill Gates the richest man in the world. And the story of how that came about is, well, pretty interesting. So the contest begins. Who would IBM buy their software from? Let's meet the two contenders. The late Gary Kildall, then age 39, a computer science PhD, and a 24-year-old Harvard dropout, Bill Gates. By the time IBM came calling in 1980, Bill Gates and his small company, Microsoft, was the biggest supplier of computer languages in the fledgling PC industry.
Many different computer manufacturers are making the CP/M operating system standard on most models.
For their operating system, though, the logical guy for the IBMers to see was Gary Kildall. He ran a company modestly called Intergalactic Digital Research. Gary had invented the PC's first operating system, called CP/M. He'd already sold 600,000 of them, so he was the big cheese of operating systems.
In the early 70s, I had a need for an operating system myself, and it just was a very natural thing to write, and it turns out other people had a need for an operating system like that. And so it was a very natural thing. I wrote it for my own use, and then started selling it.
In Gary's mind, it was the dominant thing, and it would always be the dominant because, you know, Bill did languages and Gary did operating systems. And he really honestly believed that would never change.
But what would change the balance of power in this young industry was the characters of the two protagonists.
So I knew Gary back when he was an assistant professor at Monterey Post Grad School, and I was simply a grad student. And went down, sat in his hot tub, smoked dope with him, and thoroughly enjoyed it all, and commiserated and talked nerd stuff. He liked playing with gadgets, just like Woz did and does, just like I did and do.
He wasn't really interested in how you drive the business. He worked on projects, things that interest him.
He didn't go rushing off to the patent office and patent CP/M and patent every line of code he could. He didn't try to just squeeze the last dollar out of it.
Gary was not a fighter. Gary avoided conflict. Gary hated conflict. Bill, I don't think anyone could say, backed away from conflict.
Nobody said future billionaires have to be nice guys. Here at the Microsoft Museum is a shrine to Bill's legacy. Bill Gates hardly fought his way up from the gutter. Raised in a prosperous Seattle household, his mother was a homemaker who did charity work, his father a successful lawyer. But beneath the affluence and comfort of a perfect American family, a competitive spirit ran deep.
I ended up spending the Memorial Day weekend with him out on his grandmother's house on Hood Canal. She turned everything into a game. It was a very, very, very competitive environment. And if you spent the weekend there, you were part of the competition. And it didn't matter whether it was hearts or pickleball or swimming to the dock, and there was always a reward for winning, and there was always a penalty for losing.
One time was funny. I went to Bill's house, and he really wanted to show me his jigsaw puzzle that he was working on. And he really wanted to talk about how, like, he did this jigsaw puzzle in, like, 4 minutes. And, like, on the box, it says, if you're a genius, then you would do the jigsaw puzzle in, like, 7. And he was into it. He's like, I can do it. And I said, no, I believe you. You don't need to break it up and do it for me.
Bill Gates can be so focused that the small things in life get overlooked.
If he was busy, he didn't bathe. He didn't change clothes. We were in New York, and the demo that we had crashed the evening before the announcement, and Bill worked all night with some other engineers to fix it. Well, it didn't occur to him to take 10 minutes for a shower after that. Just didn't occur to him that that was important. And he badly needed a shower that day.
The scene is set. In California, laid-back Gary Kildall, already making the best-selling PC operating system, CP/M. In Seattle, Bill Gates, maker of BASIC, the best-selling PC language, but always prepared to seize an opportunity. So IBM had to choose one of these guys to write the operating system for its new personal computer. One would hit the jackpot. The other would be forgotten, a footnote in the history of the personal computer. And it all starts with a telephone call to an 8th floor office in that building, the headquarters of Microsoft, in 1980.
At about noon, I guess, I called Bill Gates on Monday and said I would like to come out and talk to him about his products.
Bill said, well, how's next week? And they said, we're on an airplane, we're leaving in an hour, we'd like to be there tomorrow. Well, hallelujah, right on.
Steve Ballmer was a Harvard roommate of Gates. He had just joined Microsoft and would end up its third billionaire. Back then, he was the only guy in the company with business training. Both Ballmer and Gates instantly saw the importance of the IBM visit.
And Bill said, Steve, you better come to the meeting. You're the only other guy here who can wear a suit. So we figured, okay, the two of us will put on suits, we'll go to this meeting.
We got there roughly 2 o'clock. And we were waiting in the front, and this young fellow came out to take us back to Mr. Gates' office. I thought he was the office boy. And of course, it was Bill. He was quite decisive. We popped out the non-disclosure agreement, the letter that said that he wouldn't tell anybody we were there and that we wouldn't hear any secrets and so forth. He signed it immediately.
Now, IBM didn't make it easy. You had to sign all these funny agreements that sort of said IBM could do whatever they wanted, whenever they wanted, and use your secrets however they felt. But so it took a little bit of faith.
Jack Sams was looking for a package from Microsoft containing both the BASIC computer language and an operating system. But IBM hadn't done their homework.
They thought we had an operating system. Because we had this soft card product that had CP/M on it, they thought we could license some CP/M for this new personal computer they told us they wanted to do. And we said, well, no, we're not in that business. And
when we discovered we didn't have he didn't have the rights to do that, and that it was not, he said, but I think it's ready. I think Gary's got it ready to go. I said, well, no time like the present, call up Gary.
So Bill, right there with them in the room, called Gary Kildall at Digital Research, said, Gary, I'm sending some guys down. They're going to be on the phone. Treat them right. They're important guys.
The men from IBM came to this Victorian house in Pacific Grove, California, headquarters of Digital Research, headed by Gary and Dorothy Kildall. Just imagine what it's like having IBM come to visit. It's like having the Queen drop by for tea. It's like having the Pope come by looking for advice. It's like a visit from God himself. And what did Gary and Dorothy do? They sent them away.
Gary had some other plans, and so he said, well, Dorothy will see you. And so we went down, the three of us.
IBM showed up with an IBM non-disclosure, and Dorothy made a decision which I think it's easy in retrospect to say was dumb.
Well, we popped out our letter that said, please don't tell anybody we're here, and we don't want to hear anything confidential. And she read it, and she said, I can't sign this.
She did what her job was. She got the lawyer to look at the non-disclosure. The lawyer, Jerry Davis, who's still in Monterey, threw up on this non-disclosure. It was uncomfortable for IBM. They weren't used to waiting, and it was an unfortunate situation. Here you are in a tiny Victorian house that's overrun with people and chaotic. And
so we spent the whole day in Pacific Grove debating with them and with our attorneys and her attorneys and everybody else about whether or not she could even talk to us about talking to us. And we left.
This is the moment Digital Research dropped the ball. IBM, distinctly unimpressed with their reception, went back to Microsoft. Bill Gates isn't the man to give a rival a second chance. He saw the opportunity of a lifetime.
Digital Research didn't seize that, and we knew it was essential. If somebody didn't do it, the project was going to fall apart. So
we just got carried away and said, look, we can't afford to lose the language business. That was the initial thought. We can't afford to have IBM not go forward. This is the most exciting thing that's going to happen in PCs.
And we were already out on the limb because we had licensed them not only BASIC, but Fortran, COBOL, Assembler, Typing Tutor, Adventure. And basically every product the company had, we had committed to do for IBM in a very short time frame.
But there was a problem. IBM needed an operating system fast, and Microsoft didn't have one. What they did have was a stroke of luck, the ingredient everyone needs to be a billionaire. Unbelievably, the solution was just across town. Paul Allen, Gates' programming partner since high school, had found another operating system.
There's a local company here in Seattle called Seattle Computer Products, a guy named Tim Patterson, and he had done an operating system, very rudimentary operating system that was kind of like CP/M.
And we just told IBM, look, we'll go get this operating system from the small local company, we'll take care of it, we'll fix it up, and you can still do a PC.
Tim Patterson's operating system, which saved the deal with IBM, was, well, adapted from Gary Kildall's CP/M.
So I took a CP/M manual that I'd gotten from the retail computer store, $5 in 1976 or something, and used that as the basis for the application programming interface, the API for my operating system. And so using these ideas that came from different places, I started in April, and it was about half time for 4 months before I had my first working version.
This is it. The operating system Tim Patterson wrote. He called it QDOS, the quick and dirty operating system. Microsoft and IBM called it PC-DOS 1.0. And under any name, it looks an awful lot like CP/M. On this computer here, I have running a PC-DOS and CP/M86, and frankly, it's very hard to tell the difference between the two. The command structures are the same, so are the directories. In fact, the only obvious external difference is the floppy drive is labeled A in PC-DOS and C in CP/M. Some difference, and yet one generated billions in revenue and the other disappeared. As usual in the PC business, the prize didn't go to the inventor, but to the exploiter of the invention. In this case, that wasn't Gary Kildall. It wasn't even Tim Patterson. There was still one problem. Tim Patterson worked for Seattle Computer Products, or SCP. They still owned the rights to QDOS, rights that Microsoft had to have.
But then we went back and said to them, look, we want to buy this thing. And SCP was, like most little companies, they, always needed cash, and so that was when they went into the negotiation.
And so ended up working out a deal to buy the operating system from him for whatever usage we wanted for $50,000.
Hey, let's pause there to savor an historic moment.
For whatever usage we wanted for $50,000.
It had to be the deal of the century, if not the millennium. It was certainly the deal that made Bill Gates and Paul Allen multi-billionaires and allowed Paul Allen to buy toys like these, his own NBA basketball team and arena. Microsoft bought outright for $50,000 the operating system they needed, and they turned around and licensed it to the world for up to $50 per PC. Think of it, 100 million personal computers running MS-DOS software funneling billions into Microsoft, a company that back then was 50 kids managed by a 25-year-old who needed to wash his hair. Nice work if you can get it, and Microsoft got it.
There are no two places further apart in the USA than southeastern Florida and Washington State, where Microsoft is based. This is Florida. Boca Raton, and this building right here is where the IBM PC was developed.
Here, the nerds from Seattle joined forces with the suits of corporate America, and in that first honeymoon year, they pulled off a fantastic achievement.
After we got a package in the mail from the people down in Florida.
As August 1981 approached, the deadline for the launch of the IBM Acorn, the PC industry held its breath.
Supposedly, maybe at this very moment, IBM is announcing their personal computer. We don't know that yet.
In companies across America, software writers like Dan Bricklin, the creator of the first spreadsheet, waited with his staff for news of the announcement. This is a moment of PC history. IBM Secrecy had codenamed the PC the Floridian Project. Everyone in the PC business knew IBM would change their world forever. They also knew that if their software was on the IBM PC, they would make fortunes.
Note that the attached information is not to be disclosed prior to any public announcement. It's on the ticker. It's on the ticker? Okay, so now you can tell people.
What we're watching are the first few seconds of a $100 billion industry.
After
years of thinking big. Today, IBM came up with something small.
Computer. Big Blue is looking for a slice of Apple's market share. IBM
Like bits and bytes mean nothing. Try this word. Money.
Now they're going to sell $1,000 computers to millions of
IBM
customers.
wants a piece of the pie. I have seen the future, said one analyst, and it computes.
Today, an IBM computer has reached a personal stage.
Nobody was ever fired for buying IBM. Now companies could put PCs with a name they trusted on desks from Wall's End to Wall Street.
What IBM said was, it's okay, corporate America, for you to now start buying and using PCs. And if it's okay for corporate America, it's got to be okay for everybody.
Your own IBM personal computer.
For all the hype, the IBM PC wasn't much better than what came before. So while the IBM name could create immense demand, it took a killer application to sustain it. The killer app for the IBM PC was yet another spreadsheet. Based on VisiCalc, but called Lotus 123, its creators were the first of many to get rich on IBM's success. Within a year, Lotus was worth